you give them an inch, they'll take a mile every time. There simply is not another example where legislators or voters have approved a form of gambling that they haven't ended up with exponentially more gambling. Most industries, there would never be a need for a promise of we'll only do a little bit of it, or we'll only do it over here. If it's such a great thing, why wouldn't it be everywhere?
Henry Flagler was no gambling man, but that didn't stop the railroad tycoon from building the Bacchus Club Casino just down the street from his first Florida hotel, the Ponce de Leon, in 1888. Catering to his high-rolling guests, the Bacchus Club was convenient, well-heeled, and illegal. It was a tumultuous time. 10 years earlier, Florida had played a pivotal role in a controversial presidential election. Cigar making still ranked among the state's top industries, and the St. Petersburg Times had just become a weekly paper. Florida hadn't yet grown up. It was still a frontier, not yet a major destination for tourists, and in some respects, wild and lawless.
The beginning of territorial government in Florida in the 1820s, some of the earliest statutes have to do with horse racing and lotteries, banning them.
By the early 20th century, gambling had spread. No longer confined to a few wealthy enclaves, gambling turned Miami into a refuge for some of the country's most powerful racketeers, while Hialeah had sprung out of the swamp, devised as a haven for horse racing and jai-alai, although both remained illegal.
In the 1920s, Florida becomes Florida. All the values we love or hate about Florida today kind of originate in the 20s. It's a fast-paced state. It's now defined not by the small towns in the Panhandle, but by these new towns or newly invented towns. And kind of along with motels and gas stations and the roadside cafe is often in exclusive areas a gambling club.
Infamous crime bosses Al Capone and Meyer Lansky established Florida Outpost in Tampa, which had become a hotbed of bolita and other forms of gambling. Before long, Tampa's gambling rings and gangland-style killings earned it the nickname Little Chicago.
Tampa was so alarmed that it wanted to change the form of government, simply because they were afraid that organized gambling was exercising such clout that it was influencing elections. And it's the source of tremendous corruption.
When the stock market crashed in 1929, Florida's boom had already gone bust. Land prices had collapsed, hurricanes drowned thousands in South Florida, and the state's citrus industry had been crippled by a devastating new crop disease. Florida was weak. Desperate for revenue, it decided to try its luck at gambling.
For most of the 20th century in Florida, the only form of gambling that was legal were pari-mutuels, the dog tracks, the horse tracks, the jai-alai frontons.
Despite political promises and high expectations, expanded gambling didn't solve the revenue problem. Desperate for money, lawmakers doubled down on gambling.
Slot machines are legalized. In gambling history, this is the grand prize. And you have slot machines in mom and pop cafes, you have them in hotels, you have them as kids go home from school using the lunch money they never use. Every day in the paper there's a story of a housewife who used the mortgage money to play slots and lost. It just becomes a public relations fiasco.
Large-scale gambling quickly spun out of control. Legalized in 1935, slot machines are quickly banned again in 1937. By the 1960s, dog racing and jai-alai had spread throughout the state. And then, government got into the game.
One of the things that's not known about the Florida lottery is how it cannibalized pari-mutuels. It began to destroy their businesses because people who enjoyed betting on dogs or horses or watching jai-alai decided that they were going to go to the 7-Eleven store instead and buy a lottery ticket.
The state-run lottery never truly makes good on its promise to enhance education funding, but it does put the private gambling industry on the ropes. Before long, the lottery becomes the newest excuse to expand gambling, allowing pari-mutuels to win major concessions from lawmakers in the form of tax breaks and more gambling. Then, the 1987 arrest of the Largo 8, several retirees playing low-stakes poker, prompts the Florida legislature to legalize home poker games. But even this seemingly simple step opens the door to more unexpected expansions of gambling. In 1988, a new federal law grants Native American tribes access to any form of gambling legal in a state, effectively expanding poker rooms to tribal properties. Facing competition from tribes, pari-mutuels successfully lobbied for poker rooms of their own. Then, 70 years after they were banned, slot machines make their return to Florida. Narrowly approved for only 7 South Florida pari-mutuels, voters are promised that slots will not spread. But they do. Federal laws give Native American tribes access to slot machines, paving the way for an agreement between the state of Florida and the Seminole tribe. Despite its many flirtations with organized gambling, the Sunshine State rejects Vegas-style mega casinos on 3 separate occasions. Its voters and lawmakers always seem to think it had something to lose. Florida never went all in on gambling, but someone did. Atlantic City, New Jersey. Boomtown, Bust Town, and inspiration for the first version of the board game Monopoly. If Henry Flagler's railroads caused Florida to rise up out of the swamp, then Jonathan Pitney's railroads caused Atlantic City to emerge from the sands. The first Atlantic City boardwalk was built in 1870. Its main purpose, help keep sand out of hotel lobbies. By the early 20th century, Atlantic City was on a high-octane building boom. Larger and more impressive hotels began to replace the smaller inns that had once housed guests. And Josiah White's Marlboro Blenheim Hotel, built on the site now occupied by Bally's Casino, was among the most distinctive. Fueled by Prohibition-era nightclubs and restaurants, the 1920s is widely considered Atlantic City's golden age. But by the end of World War II, Atlantic City was in decline. High-speed jet travel and a rising middle class opened access to subtropical destinations, and soon, places like Miami Beach had eclipsed Monopoly City. Then the casinos moved in. Desperate, Atlantic City opened its doors.
Atlantic City became bankrupt, if not officially, then practically speaking. It had almost nothing going for it in terms of economic activity. And it was what I think the casino industry seizes upon, which is desperate.
The whole idea was these casinos were going to come in and revitalize this dying seaside town. People were gullible and they fell for it.
This casino is now open.
I was supportive of casino gambling in Atlantic City because I felt it could provide a catalyst to revitalize this once great resort area in the state of New Jersey. If I knew then what I know now, clearly I would not have supported it. When I look back at what happened, or more accurately did not happen, the promises never came to fruition. the revitalization of Atlantic City never came. I mean, if you go to Atlantic City today and you walk a couple blocks off the boardwalk, you still see the same decay, and even worse than when this was approved, over 30 years ago.
When casinos first came to Atlantic City, I think people were super excited there. The business owners, the merchants, everybody's all geared up. Wow, these casinos are going to bring all these people in. It's going to be a big boom for all of us. And it didn't take a whole lot of time to figure this out, that it was actually hurting their businesses. The casinos are masters at sucking the people in and keeping them there and then sending them home.
Before long, 40% of Atlantic City restaurants and a third of its local retailers had gone out of business. Far from curing Atlantic City's economic woes, casino gambling made them worse.
The real tragedy, I think, of the casino gambling expansion story is that as small businesses disappear, as restaurants go out of business, as other businesses can't compete, what you have is a casino-driven local economy. Then you really are in a bind. Then what you have to do is support the one big industry in town, which is the casino, which continues to extract wealth from the community. So it's a downward spiral.
I'll never forget the time that my director gave me his philosophy or his understanding of his job. At that time I looked at him as I wanted to see him as a mentor. But his concept was that his job, his duty, was to keep the players in this rat maze, to keep them. How can you keep them in here as long as you can? There is no partnership with the other businesses or a partnership with anything else in that sort, because it's just, the casino is meant to be the hub. It's meant to be the hub.
The gambling industry's promise of jobs and tax revenues gains them entrance to Atlantic City. But after a decade of waiting for promised revenues, authorities finally act. They form a new entity called the Casino Reinvestment Authority. Its purported purpose: force casinos to invest the promised revenues into community redevelopment. It is too late. By this time, the casino industry has already begun to reconfigure the local economy and regulatory system to service itself.
I was asked to apply to be the first executive director of the Casino Reinvestment Authority in Atlantic City. And I had a meeting with some members of the authority that had just been named, and the then mayor of Atlantic City. And we were talking about what needed to be done to revitalize Atlantic City. In a discussion, it became clear that it really wasn't all about revitalizing, but what was going to be done to support casino gambling, and not what the benefits of casino gambling would be to the community at large.
The mayor that Frank Nero met with was James Ussery, who would later be arrested with 13 other political figures following an investigation into public corruption. Among other things, he was charged with official misconduct, bribery, and conspiracy. Charges were later dropped when he pled guilty to campaign contribution violations. Of the 9 most recent mayors, 6 have been charged with some form of corruption.
Gambling is the industry in town, so that those casinos drive policy, and the lobbyists there basically own all the politicians. You do what the casinos say.
The problem with the casino industry, from a legislature's point of view, is that everywhere they go, they green the legislature. And the reason why they're different than other industries that lobby a local commission or a state legislature is that the amount of money they're going to gain is so fantastical that corrupting a state legislature is simply a cost of doing business.
The ribbon cutting for Atlantic City's newest casino, Revel, was hailed by gambling industry analyst Spectrum Gaming as just the tonic Atlantic City needs. About a year later, Revel was bankrupt. To remain afloat, the casino received a tax reimbursement from the state, costing more than $260 million. With the local economy now reliant on gambling, casinos had become too big to fail.
In Atlantic City, we have this newest casino called the Revel Casino. As it was being built, it went bankrupt.
And Governor Christie came in, and even he put together a deal with some tax-free bonds to help get the Revel built. But the market had already spoken. They walked away from that deal because they realized they weren't going to make any money.
You see revenue falling in Atlantic City. You see them struggling, trying to find a new model. And now their new marketing campaign is Gamblers Wanted. That's the new Revel marketing campaign. And they're going to what I think most casinos are really focused on, which is gambling. And that's their business, and they don't want to make any bones about it anymore, and that's what they're promoting.
When you visit places like Atlantic City, the last thing you think of is family friendly. They tried to brand themselves as a family friendly place. And what they found is families don't want anything to do with all of the problems that the big casinos bring.
What you see with casino gambling is there's a lot comes with the package. In any place that you go that this has been a premier feature to be a gambling destination, you'll find plenty of glitz and glamour, but you go just 2 blocks off of that glitz and glamour and you start seeing the heartache.
If you like crime, if you like addictions, invite in gambling, because that's what it's going to bring. Drug addiction doubles, new bankruptcies up 10 to 42%. New crime increasing 10%, and it's lose-lose.
When people financially are defeated by the gaming machine, you're going to have to pick up that collateral damage. And you'll see it in every community where this looked like it was going to be the savior and the economic boom for their community. But just go a few blocks off the glitzy strip and see what you've got, and it's pretty demoralizing.
Whenever you bring up Atlantic City or any of the other places that they've gone, their response is, well, Florida's not Atlantic City, or Florida's not Las Vegas. I mean, to constantly tell our community, don't worry, what's happened everywhere else won't happen to you, is not reassuring at any level. Maybe you are like them, or maybe everybody becomes like them once they sign on the dotted line.
Nearly 30 years after Atlantic City approved its first casino, the city remains economically and fiscally exhausted. 200 restaurants have gone out of business. It has no grocery store, no movie theater. A greater percentage of residents live below the poverty line than in 1970, while the median household income is 60% lower than the state average. Violent crime, on the other hand, is more than 500% higher. In the last 40 years, nearly a third of its population has fled. Although billions have rushed into the casino's coffers, buying bailouts and unprecedented influence, Monopoly City is on life support, kept on basic rations by the town's only major industry left standing, gambling. In Atlantic City, the gambling industry has seen its own revenues fall for 7 straight years. In the last year alone, its profit has tumbled a catastrophic 54%. With its competition wiped out, the gambling industry has begun to devour itself. Despite the obvious problems, Atlantic City is now trapped. It must double down on gambling. Now, the casinos have set their sights on one of the industry's oldest, biggest prizes, Florida. Once billed as a firewall against the further expansion of gambling, the renegotiation of the state's seminal compact is the latest excuse to open new discussions of mega casinos in Florida. Malaysian casino conglomerate Genting plans to build the largest casino in the world in Miami. It would have more gambling under one roof than 6 of the largest casinos on the Vegas Strip combined. To sell their deal, the industry is making promises that the taxpayers of Atlantic City would find very familiar.
The industry was sort of back here again in the state of Florida. And it was almost exactly word for word for some of the same kind of promises and presentation I had heard 30 years ago in New Jersey. I mean, it was insulting.
When big casinos return to Florida, the push is led by Nevada's Las Vegas Sands and Malaysia's Genting. The goal: restructure Florida's regulatory system to make way for mega casinos, remaking Florida in the image of Vegas. The timing was no coincidence. Still reeling from the Great Recession, the Sunshine State was hungry for revenue and desperate for jobs.
We need all jobs, any jobs.
They come at us when we're down, when we're weak, when the economy is bad. They try and lure our elected officials and our voters with the promise of more jobs and bountiful government revenue.
Every time I've seen some major movement in trying to do some expansion, it usually happens in the environment where they're trying to balance the budget, and suddenly this submarine comes up from underwater of how I can solve all your problems, and you can get something for nothing. That's a false promise.
This industry is to create 100,000 jobs. 70% will be minorities and women. We will guarantee half the seats of non-stop flights and charters from Asia Pacific. Asia Pacific, Europe, the export market. We're talking of 4 to 6 million visitors. I guarantee you there'll be 10 Global Express flying non-stop to Shanghai, Beijing, and to Hong Kong, okay, every day. 50, 100,000 jobs, up to 1.7 billion for the state, maximize benefits to everybody. I think everyone is a winner in this game.
It's an industry that makes its living off of convincing people to make bets. You got a very good chance of making a lot of money here. Of course, you have a greater chance of losing a huge amount of money and a bunch of other things that are important to you as well.
These were such absurd claims that even the sponsor of the bill that would have legalized his casinos basically said, "That's ridiculous. Stop saying it. You're hurting your case."
These casinos, they will come in and they will throw millions of dollars around. And they will claim that they're going to add 100,000 jobs here and 20,000 jobs there. They will say whatever it takes to get people to think it's a good idea.
Every slot machine takes in $300,000 worth of lost consumer spending per year. It doesn't create a job, they're just dumping their money into the slot machine. You dust them off and collect the money. Well, that $300,000 that's going into the slot machine, on average, per year, is not going into cars, refrigerators, computers, healthcare, and essential education and medical expenses, and that translates into one lost job per slot machine per year in the economy.
In any other industry, you create sales, and you can only sell so many tangible things. But at a casino, you have to increase a person's losses. You have to increase a segment's losses. You have to increase a community's losses. That's how you succeed. That's how you make a name for yourself. That's how you get a bonus, is by the amount of losses you accumulate from your community, from your surrounding communities, from a certain segment.
There's little evidence to suggest that casinos can coexist with established tourism-based economies, or that they can deliver on promises of jobs, revenue, or economic revitalization. Despite the glitz of the Strip, Las Vegas has posted one of the slowest economic recoveries in the country and ranks among the worst for violent crime, car theft, foreclosures, robbery, divorce, and unemployment. Across the nation, the economic recoveries of casino economies have lagged behind others or stalled altogether. Nonetheless, casino interests are using the same playbook and making the same promises in Florida. Their strategy? Money, and lots of it.
When I went to the presentations in Miami, and as I talked to some of the elected officials, it was clear that they were going to endorse this based upon really very little knowledge, but more on consultants and lobbyists who had influenced them.
When the Miami Herald asked Frank Nero about his views on Genting's plans for a Vegas-style casino, he shared them. The story of Atlantic City came out. It was a story the casino interest did not want told. Despite having recently signed a 3-year contract to continue heading the Beacon Council, Nero was forced to resign his 17-year post when his views were published.
It was told to me that the Beacon Council was told that if I didn't leave, the funding for the Beacon Council could be in jeopardy. It was very striking to me that they wanted to stifle me, they wanted to shut me up, they wanted me out. I think they felt they were on a roll. I think they felt that this was wired, that they were going to get it passed, and this sort of derailed them.
They try to build sort of an aura of inevitability. This is all going to happen. It's just a matter of when, and kind of deteriorate and break down any objection along that pathway.
When it comes to casinos, when they become such a dominating presence in a community, they are like Goliath. But there is no winning of throwing a stone to take them down, because if there's so much money that's coming in, there are so many people that are involved in getting the benefits of the casino being in the community, you don't mess with that.
Despite its influence, Ginting suffered a serious setback in 2012 when Florida lawmakers refused to legalize mega casinos. Meanwhile, the Las Vegas Sands was battered by a series of legal and public relations crises, including news that Chinese police had busted 110 prostitutes and 22 pimps in one night at one of its properties in Macau. It is also the subject of 2 federal probes, one tied to a federal money laundering investigation, and one concerning possible violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Despite setbacks, casinos are all in on Florida. The prize is simply too big. Far from being turned back at the gate, Ginting and the Las Vegas Sands are lobbying even harder for the legalization of unprecedented Vegas-style mega casinos. The pivotal showdown, spring 2014, Florida's legislative session.
Once they're here, once they have their foot in the door, the same thing that happened in New Jersey and the same thing that happened in Las Vegas is bound to happen here in Florida. And that's just not a risk that Florida should take.
Miami can't handle all the poison that will come from a big international casino, whether will do a slightly better job than Atlantic City is sort of a silly point to make. I think it's a straight up and down question. Do you want to bring a toxic business into Miami that will hurt people and surrounding businesses or not?
I've seen how easy it is for a sane-minded person, whether you're black, you're white, you're rich, you're poor, to just lose themselves into this entertainment, into this gaming environment.
And it makes otherwise smart, educated, articulate, poised people do crazy things. It ruined my life. Because of the job that I had at the hospital, I was there for 27 years, I had opportunities that other people did not have, and those opportunities turned illegal. When I needed, just like any addiction, when you need to feed it. And always knowing that you're going to be caught. And I was caught. And I lost my job of 27 years. I was fired. And knowing that it was going to come, and knowing that I'm a nurse, I had everything ready. And there was an entire weekend where I didn't see a way out, and I did attempt to end my life. Didn't work, obviously. But but I had it planned out because I knew it was going to. God it's a beast of an addiction, I'm telling you, just a beast. I was so ashamed.
I received a call from a lady. Somehow she got my extension. And I picked up. I'm like, hey, this is JT Mathis, what can I do for you? I didn't know if it was someone that worked at the casino or if it was someone. He said, will you stop? Just stop sending me these mail pieces. My husband's dead. He's gone. You guys destroyed him. Just leave me alone. You guys keep on sending this. It's already hard enough. It's already hard enough. Just leave, just stop. You know, that mail piece, I sent that database to the printers. That person put me as the face. That's that continuous cycle, is developing players, watching them lose their money, and then you hear about the divorce, you hear about the suicide, then another person comes, and you gotta do it all over. That's that cycle, over and over and over, developing that player. I've looked over thousands and thousands, maybe tens of thousands of accounts. It's a lifetime loss. There's a number right in the corner that has the amount of money that the player lost. How can you recover from an accumulated nest egg or accumulated wealth that you saved for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and you lost it in a month, 2 months, a year? How do you rebound from that? Let me just play another dollar.
Sponsored by NoCasinos.org.